a lot of Bhagavad Gita philosophy, which is good. It's necessary to form that Sambandha Jnana, understand who you are, who God is, what the purpose of life is, what's the kind of logical a lot of Bhagavad Gita conclusion as to what one should do in life. But Krishna's pastimes are a little different. They give you all that, but actually covered over by all that aspect, the philosophical aspects, is there's a sweetness to Krishna's pastimes. And singing bhajans for Krishna and speaking about Krishna's pastimes have come to be one of my favorite offerings that we do here. So I'm glad you can join on this night. And I have a really lovely story to share with you all. But I had a Krishna book not that far away from me. Is there another book with it? Oh, thank goodness. All right. So, have you heard a lot of Krishna's pastimes before? Are you guys familiar with Srimad Bhagavatam, the 10th canto? These are where all these pastimes. This was actually my first book in Krishna consciousness. This book saved my life, and now I'm utilizing it to help try and enhance the lives of others. Um, but this is a really, really nice pastime. It's called the delivering of the wives of the Brahmanas. So, where we were last time, Krishna just stole all the he stole all of the clothing of the young cowherd girls who were praying for him for a husband. Um, so you can visit this pastime place in India. There's a nice, they actually wrap a bunch of, not in India, in Vrindavan, but they wrap a bunch of nice clothing articles around the tree, and you could go also wrap a piece of clothing article symbolizing your offering your clothing to Krishna if you'd like. But we just talked about that last week. And the symbology, there, so one of the reasons I really like this offering is because there's a couple ways you can look at the pastimes of Krishna, and all are valid. But the best way that our acharyas give is to synthesize that there's literal meaning, there's allegorical meaning, and then actually, eventually, you yourself could be involved in these type of pastime. Ooh, yeah, just tilt that towards you, part. But this is for a very advanced stage of devotee, and we're not. We're at a very beginning level stage of devotee where Krishna is appearing to us um, through different media, like his holy name, through his shastras, the Bhagavatam, through the deity form, the Murti, and so on, Bhagavad Gita, so on, and different articles to worship him through. But we don't have a direct perception of Krishna yet. We don't have a direct perception of God. It's maybe to some of us it's theoretical. Some of us we have faith. We grew up, we heard about it. We don't have so much practical realization. But this is actually the portal from which we get practical realization. Chanting his names like we just did via kirtan, and some of us have a japa practice. Um, Different forms of worship like we do in the morning, and then hearing Krishna's pastimes and his teachings. So we talked about last week the stealing of the clothes of the gopis, and they all prayed. It was 2 weeks ago because last week we started talking about Janmashtami again. But they all prayed for Krishna as their husband, and there was really no way Krishna could do that in the societal context that they were in. I mean, he could have changed the whole society if he really wanted to, but um, he didn't find that appropriate. He found what was most appropriate was to fulfill their desire, but in such a way that he could also accomplish everything else he wanted to accomplish in his pastimes. So what he did was they did all these austerities. Remember, they ate plain khichdi for a month straight, and they did all these austerities so that Krishna could be my husband. And then at the end of their vrat, on the last day, Krishna appeared, and they were worshiping goddess Katyayani. And Krishna appeared, and he said, "Hey, girls, how are you doing?" And they're so excited because they've been praying for Krishna as their husband, and now he appears. But then when they realized, and it's cold, they're a little cold in the water. It's in the month after Kartik when it starts to really get cold. What's that, Margashirsha, that month? Margashirsha. So it starts to get cold there, and but then they wanted to get their clothes, but they saw all their clothes were missing from the shoreline. So Krishna, he's um, goading them and he's saying like, all right, well, if you want, and they're chastising Krishna and they're arguing with Krishna. We'll complain against Kamsa. We'll complain to your father Nanda Maharaj that you're doing this, and like, oh, what will they do? I don't seem to care or anything. So Krishna is going back and forth with them. And so basically, he convinces them all to approach him one by one and receive their clothing back. But also part of the trick was they were trying to cover themselves, at least to some degree, because they were like chaste ladies. They didn't want to do this type of thing. But Krishna said, "Oh, but you should not have been bathing naked when doing your sacrifice." Now, Krishna knew what the sacrifice was for, that they all wanted to marry him, which is why he showed up there. So, but this is actually why he did this, was because he wanted them to completely surrender everything to him. So he came up with a trick, and he said that in order to repent, you must place your pranams above the crown of your head and beg Varunadev for forgiveness for bathing naked in his waters when trying to do a sacrifice. So the gopis were quite gullible and they believed anything Krishna said. So so they begged like this to Varuna. And that took away their covering and they appeared naked before Krishna. And in that appearing naked, now remember, Krishna's only 7 years old at this point. The gopis, they're also only a similar age, maybe 6 years old, something like this, between 6 and 8, something like that. They're unmarried still, so maybe even younger. But this is symbolic because we have to go before the Lord naked. We can't be like going before the Lord. We can with all kinds of coverings and all kinds of other things. You know, if we want to fully surrender unto the Lord, we have to give everything, even our last bit of garments, even our last coverings, things we want to hide. You can't hide anything from the Lord. He'll trick you to bring it out anyway. So, so ultimately, this was the symbology, the allegorical meaning, where we can find really deep meaning in this pastime, but we could give everything to the Lord, including that last little bit of covering, that last little thing holding us back, whatever that might be. It could be family, it could be friends, it could be societal constraints, it could be our appearance in public, our appearance in the workplace, it could be so many different things. But ultimately, so that was the symbolic meaning of last time. The reason I'm mentioning it is now what the continuation is happening. So kind of Krishna after this, and also ultimately this was to fulfill their desire because only the especially the only in Vedic system, if a young woman could only appear naked before her husband. That's the Vedic way, so to say. So they all prayed for Krishna as their husband. And so he fulfilled the arrangement so that they actually went before him and he saw them as their husband. And later on, those same gopis got to have more pastimes with Krishna. You could say with him as their husband. But society wasn't going to, society wasn't going to be in agreement. They had to, this is a very, very interesting aspect of Vrindavan pastimes, that Krishna did many of these things, especially with the gopis in what's called the Parakiya Bhav, which is like the forbidden love type of, where society says, no, 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 no. But behind the cover of the pastimes, there's an intensity that Krishna shares with his most intimate devotees. All devotees, we're all emanations. If you read Bhagavad Gita, you understand that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and everything is created by him. So there really is no separation. But in another sense, there's very intimate moods between Krishna and his devotees. And unless we understand the science from very confidential devotees, we may misinterpret these things and we may say, oh, Krishna's debaucherous, or look at this, he's a playboy, or something like this. But that's actually not the case. If you understand these things that's why it's recommended we read the whole 9 cantos of the Bhagavatam previously before we get to Krishna's pastimes, because we can very much misunderstand these things. So anyway, but Prabhupada saw a need when he was having really intense health struggles from this world. He paused his Bhagavatam translating and he worked on this book because he knew that unless the pastimes of Krishna were given, his Krishna consciousness movement will be incomplete. So he worked on this book and he summarized all of Krishna's pastimes in the Bhagavatam. That's what we're studying. But like I said, it would be good to go back and start from the beginning of the Bhagavatam and work your way up to really be able to appreciate and understand all of the Siddhanta or Tattva, the truth and conclusions that lead one to understand Krishna. If you'd like, we do morning Bhagavatam at least 5 mornings a week as of right now. And it's on YouTube too, so you could catch up or you could listen to it if you want. We're going through that now, and it's a very good study. But simultaneously on Friday nights, we're continuing with Krishna's pastimes. So the next pastime after Krishna, and even all these ones are on YouTube too, so we start with Krishna's birth and we go all the way through the pastimes of where we're going to now. So if you ever did want to re-listen, it's there. But now we're on the next pastime. Krishna went back to his friends. He answered the gopis' prayers and he went back to his friends. I think this all happened on the same day. And so now it's almost noon. He did this in the morning with the gopis, and now it's almost noon. And his friends were noticing that all their friends and Krishna and Balaram appeared hungry. So they inquired to Krishna, Balaram, where can we get food at this time? We're out in the middle of the forest. We need to get some food. And really what they wanted to do, they wanted to satisfy Krishna and Balaram's need for food. They didn't so much care about their own food, because that's the nature of devotees. They always just want to serve Krishna. So Krishna, he worked up a plan. He said, there are brahmanas doing a Vedic sacrifice nearby. Why don't you go there and ask them? Tell them that but don't tell them I'm asking, because they consider me of a lower caste. I'm a Vaishya caste. Balaram he's known to be the son of Vasudeva, so he's of a Kshatriya caste. So why don't you ask in his name? So, but even Kshatriya is lower than Brahmin caste, right? So they went to the friends went to the Brahmins. And the Brahmins were, it says in Bhagavad Gita, the whole purpose of all sacrifices is to lead one to Krishna, to lead one to the personality of Godhead. That's what the purpose of all sacrifices are. But the Brahmanas, when we get too rigid in our practices, sometimes, I hope Michael is listening, because this is always a fear that we can get. Sometimes we can get so rigid in following all the rules and regulations of a practice, like these Brahmanas, that we'll actually forget the essence. And what is the essence? The essence is to develop love unto the Lord, to have a personal loving relationship with the Lord, who's the object of that sacrifice. It's not how many times you circle around the body, or saying the mantra exactly like this. The real gem is prem, or love, real exchange of love between the living entity and God. So this is the essence of spiritual life. So Krishna wanted to teach in this pastime that many things. So the Brahmanas, they'd heard about Krishna and Balaram. They do some amazing feats nearby, but they're brahmanas. They're really approaching God. They do all these rituals. They have so many elevated practices. So they ignored the friends. They said no. And Krishna and Balaram even told the boys how to ask in such a way that it wouldn't disturb the Brahman sacrifice and it would be bona fide. And like I said, all sacrifices, it says in Bhagavad Gita, and it says in multiple places, that all sacrifices are ultimately for pleasing the Supreme Lord. I mean, Bhagavad Gita says for Vishnu. Yet, here he is, he's coming to ask to take some remnants of the sacrifice, and the Brahmanas ignore him. So this is the unfortunate circumstance. So what ended up happening was they went back to Krishna and Balaram disappointed. And he taught them about begging. He said, no. You should not be disappointed. When you beg, anyone here ever do book distribution? Yeah. How many people want to take a book or a flyer or anything like that? Very few. So Krishna's teaching about begging. When you beg, you should never expect everybody to be accepting you. You should just be content with whatever comes. So Krishna was teaching this to the boys. And he said, but don't worry. Yes, these brahmanas, they're very, I think he says they're even foolish. They're very caught up in their sacrifice. But their wives are actually greater devotees than them. Go to their wives and tell them the same thing. Tell them that we are hungry, we're in the forest, we're nearby. And so similarly, the friends go to the wives, and the wives had heard about Krishna. Actually, this was a thing with Krishna and Balaram. Their pastimes were circulating around the local sphere of Vraj and Vrindavan. And all the ladies, when they would go to market or whatever, when they would associate with other ladies, they would hear about these pastimes of these amazing boys, Krishna and Balaram killing this demon, doing this amazing thing, doing that amazing thing. So they had heard about Krishna, and so as soon as they heard that they were nearby and they could serve him, they immediately got all the food stuff from the sacrifices. They make the best types of foods at sacrifices. So they got all the best items. And all of a sudden, the husbands and the brothers and the fathers, they're all protesting. Where do you think you're going? You cannot go. But they didn't care. They abandoned all forms of family and societal responsibility. Actually, Prabhupada comments that they actually followed in an exemplary way one of the final teachings of Bhagavad Gita, one of the concluding teachings, Sarvadharman Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Vraja Aham Tvam Sarva Papebhyo Moksha Yishyami Ma Suchaha. And that is, abandon all forms of dharma, abandon all forms of societal and occupational duties, and just surrender unto me. You know, there may be so many societal circumstances that may happen. Society may tell you in this circumstance, no Krishna, that's not important right now. Maybe your work's more important. No, your family duties are more important. No, this is more important. But Krishna concludes in Bhagavad Gita, this is never the case. He is always going to be of the topmost importance, for he is the source of all those things. And I kid you not, if you always prioritize Krishna, everything will work out nicely in your life. Everything. Somehow, I don't always prioritize Krishna, but the more I do prioritize Krishna, I see this working in my life. Everything gets taken care of that I need, whether it's my finances, whether it's my relationship, whether it's my friendships, and things like this. So no matter what, the Brahmins' wives, they led by example in this way. So they go running to Krishna, and all their fathers, brothers, husbands, they're so angry with them, like, where are you going? What are you doing? But they just go into the forest altogether. And so they meet up with Krishna and Balaram, and Krishna is sitting there with his arm around one friend. He's got a white lotus in his hand, and he's very attractive, and the wives of the Brahmanas are so attracted to him, which isn't something normally that wives should be doing. But I'm looking at my wife back there, not you, Supriya. So anyway, The wives of the Brahmanas, they were not, they were looking at Krishna, but they were embracing him within their hearts. They were looking at him, and they were actually embracing him in the heart. So this is this would be bad character for women normally, but with Krishna it's good character. He's the only person where this is of good character, to abandon even your husbands and your brothers and all these things like this. So, but Krishna, every time you'll see this is, and there's going to be a fundamental difference between these wives of the Brahmanas and the gopis. But the wives of the Brahmanas, they came, they wanted to serve Krishna, and they did. And Krishna said, "It's very nice that you brought food, and thank you so much, but you should go back to your husbands. Why would you leave your husbands and all these other things behind?" You know, like kind of chastising them for abandoning Dharma. But the women, they were saying, "This is not befitting of you to say this. You asked for us." And two, you know, and then they actually gave some Siddhanta. You're the purpose of all the Vedas. You're the whole purpose of all the sacrifices. Life reaches its perfection by surrendering unto you. So they knew this type of thing, which is why they surrendered. But ultimately, Krishna was very pleased by this. But he did tell them, and he said, "And besides, we have already angered our brothers, our fathers, our husbands. They will not take us back anyway, so now you're our only shelter." But Krishna said to them, he said, no, surely they will take you back. They will understand what was done. And he actually guided them to go back. He coaxed them to go back. Now, something very similar will happen at the Ras dance. You've heard of the Ras dance? Yes, many people have heard of the Ras dance. You probably shouldn't hear about the Ras dance unless you go through all the other pastimes first. But in the Ras dance, something similar will happen. But the gopis and the Brahmins' wives will do different things. The Brahmins' wives eventually agreed to Krishna, and they said, "Okay, we'll go back and serve our husbands." There was one wife who did not make it, though. Her husband was able, and brothers were able to constrain her and lock her in her room. And she meditated so intensely on Krishna that actually she gave up her body. And she joined Krishna in the spiritual world, which is actually she's the most fortunate of the bunch. But the rest, they eventually, they went back and they served their husbands. And what ended up happening was that their husbands realized the elevated position of Krishna and Balaram when seeing all their wives running and how they had heard so much about it. And they'd realized that how unfortunate we are, that we were in the middle of a sacrifice pursuing the Vedic truth, the absolute truth, and then the proprietor of the whole sacrifice comes to us and we ignored him. But yet our wives, who are both so simple, they're not learned in all the Vedas, they're not learned in all the rituals, they're not learned in this thing and that art or this thing and this thing. But yet they knew immediately to run. So they actually felt bad, and they glorified, as soon as their wives got back, Krishna was correct, they glorified their wives and actually took their wives as gurus, so to say. They not like formally, but they humbly realized that the wives were of a more advanced position than them. So they actually took shelter of their wives' devotion. And yet, they wanted to correct their behavior, but because people were hearing stories of Krishna, the demons were coming to Krishna, Kamsa wants to kill Krishna, all these things, the word is getting out. The Brahmanas were afraid of Kamsa, so they wouldn't go and try and rectify their mistake. And so this is another lesson here. If we have too many material attachments, Maybe we like our position in life, maybe we like this or that, and we're afraid to disturb the status quo, we're afraid to disturb our position, our comfortable position in life, like the Brahmanas. Then we might miss out on Krishna, even when he's calling us. Please come, I have service for you. Oh yeah, no, I have this is very important, this is very important. But what could be more important than the source of everything? So this is one of the things. I'm going to read from Sri Krishna Samhita. This is a little book summary by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He actually wrote a lot on this pastime. He usually gives, with each pastime, he gives maybe 1 or 2 verses, but he wrote a bit here. So here we go. While tending the cows near Mathura, Sri Krishna begged food grains from the Brahmanas who were engaged in sacrifice. Being proud of their caste, those Brahmanas considered that performing sacrifices was the highest principle and therefore did not give Krishna any food. So again, the sacrifice, the ritual, was above the actual essence of the ritual, service unto Krishna. But they didn't understand this. The reason for this is that high caste Brahmanas are so-called followers of the Vedas, and therefore they cannot realize the subtle purport of the Vedas. They follow the process of insignificant fruitive activities and become materialistic, or they study the science of self-realization and speculative knowledge and become absorbed in impersonalism. Such Brahmanas prefer to simply remain controlled by the scriptural injunctions or previous ancestors by formally carrying out their instructions. They are unable to understand that attachment to the Lord is the primary purpose of all scriptures. So how can they become servants of Krishna? So it's not your sacrifices or your knowledge or following this technique. It's ultimately attachment to the Lord. We should not misunderstand from this that all Brahmanas are mundane fruitive workers or followers of speculative knowledge. Many great personalities appeared in Brahmin families and attained the topmost position of devotional service. So this isn't like a knock on Brahmins. It's just showing that Brahmins are supposed to be the highest class, but they oftentimes can get proud of their position and miss the whole point of what being a Brahmin could be about. Therefore, the purport of this verse is that ass-like Brahmanas, ass-like means like donkey-like Brahmanas, who formally carry out the rules and regulations are averse to Krishna, but swan-like Brahmanas are servants of Krishna and thus worshipable by all. So we should try to be like the swan-like Brahmanas and always feel that we're in service to Krishna. And never be like the ass-like Brahmanas and think that the sacrifice or the rules and the regulation, the ritual, is the more important thing, when it's always about our attachment and love for the Lord. That's why the rituals even take place, to help us cultivate this. So anyway, one thing I can think of is in our movement we chant rounds. We chant a certain number of rounds. And sometimes we might, I know personally, we might rush through our rounds or, just focus, and I've done this, I do this in my life more than I should. We might just focus on a number, focus on doing a certain amount of duty every day. And in one sense that might be good, but in another sense it should ultimately be about cultivating attachment to the Lord. So this is actually why we do what we do. This is why we do our sadhana. That's why we do our worship in the morning. It shouldn't be burdensome activity or feel like, once I do complete the number of circles, or I say all the mantras, or I do this, then it's complete. No, is this facilitating a deeper attachment to the Lord? So Krishna wanted to prove this point to the Brahmanas in this pastime. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he continues, the wives of the ass-like Brahmanas represent people who are subordinate to those with undeveloped faith. Being under the control of the sweetness of Krishna, who is the Supersoul, they went to the forest and offered themselves to him. Those who have undeveloped faith are called mundane devotees. So this is actually very relevant. Most people are subordinate to the religious hierarchies. That could be an institution, Like for instance, in Jesus' time, there was a hierarchy of Jews who were leading the people, and people were following them. But Jesus had to show them, like, no, this is not right. Even in this, the Brahmanas are the leaders of the society of how to do Vedic sacrifices. But the wives, actually, they were subordinate to them. But ultimately, when Krishna came calling, they made the right decision and they ran to Krishna. So like this, we have to be very careful sometimes. And I could become guilty of this. I could become a so-called leader in a society of devotees here. But I might not have the proper scope. I might be prioritizing the rituals or the sacrifice or doing it like this many times like this, and I might lose the essence of really what is the deepest thing for attachment for the Lord. And if that were the case, then you should not listen to me if I were to do such a thing. So this is this happens, but Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he continues, being under the control of the sweetness of Krishna, who is the super soul, they went to the forest and offered themselves to him. Those who have undeveloped faith are called mundane devotees. By this incident, the equality of all living entities is ascertained or understood. There is no consideration of caste in pleasing Krishna. Rather, caste consciousness sometimes becomes an obstacle in the development of love. So now the caste system is, for all intents and purposes, often demonized in India. The West has demonized it, and now much of India is believing the West and saying, no, this is bad. That's not agreed upon by our acharyas. The caste system is actually just a factual understanding of people's nature in life. There's some people who are going to do physical menial labor in the world. Most people, you can call it the employee caste. Most people are striving to be employees, to just do service unto others. Yes, that's good. Some people are very skilled in trade and business and have a knack for making money and acquiring money and all these things. This is the Vaishya. Some people want to enforce justice. Actually, my wife kind of has this nature. If anyone is slightly wronged in some way, she wants to fight for justice for that person, even if it has nothing to do with us. But these are Kshatriya natured people. They want to protect others and enforce rules and enforce justice. And ideally, all of those castes would do well to serve the intelligent class of people, who should be the Brahmanas, who know the higher meaning of life, the higher purpose of life, to know Brahman, the spiritual nature of life. But that's all very good until that position of being a Brahmin can get to one's head. And if you're a mundane Brahmin or an ass-like Brahmin, like mentioned here, like in this pastime, we can we can miss the whole essence of understanding Brahman, which is spirit, by rejecting the pinnacle of spirit, which is God. So this happened in this pastime. He continues, and I think it's not much more. Yes, this is the last one. He said, in order to maintain social orders, the Aryans, which is the civilized ancient followers of the Vedas, divided society into 4 castes and 4 social orders. If the social system is protected, then people's spiritual lives are nourished by good association and discussion. Therefore, the Varnashram system should be accepted in all respects. By this arrangement, there is a possibility of gradually attaining love for Krishna. The main purpose for this arrangement is the cultivation of spiritual life, or love for Krishna. Even if one attains perfection without following this process, still it should not be disregarded. At this point, one should understand that after attaining perfection, this process naturally becomes unimportant. There is no fault in the rejection of the relatively less important process of varnashram by those who have attained perfection in the form of love for Krishna. Therefore, the conclusion is that faults and qualities can be attributed only in respect to the qualification of the performer. So basically, the devotee, if one really takes to, right, at the end of Bhagavad Gita, we explain, and Prabhupada explained, that the advanced devotee actually abandons all forms of dharma and just does anything to surrender unto Krishna. That's the advanced devotee. That's like the concluding recommendation in Bhagavad Gita. But up until that point, until you're ready to take a complete surrender, actually Varnashram, following one's dharma, that's why the beginning of Bhagavad Gita is all about doing dharma. And then the end of Bhagavad Gita is all about rejecting dharma for Krishna. Because this is the more advanced teaching. Because one is a good teaching, Varnashram Dharma, the caste, following your duties to society, that's a good teaching. But the best teaching is to be willing to give up even all of that for Krishna. That includes family members, that includes even work responsibilities, that includes so many things. Be willing to give up everything for Krishna. And that's where the ultimate reward is lying. The ultimate reward won't lie in a job, it won't rely in money, it won't rely in harmonious relationships with relatives or with a significant other or with your children. It's ultimately the summum bonum of life is going to be in one's relationship with the Lord. So this is exemplified in this pastime. But, like I said, the way the Brahmins' wives and the gopis responded to an almost identical circumstance was very different. Excuse me, I had a large lunch. Sorry about that. Too much lunch. So, if we see, when we get to the and it's going to come in a few weeks' time, we'll get to the gopis' pastimes. But when the gopis approach Krishna at the Rasa Leela and he tells them to also go away, I'm going to leave a little cliffhanger, but they don't listen to him. Why? Because they have a higher avenue for service. They very adamantly want to serve Krishna. And they're not going to let any type of formality get in the way. And even the Brahmins' wives, once they realized that their husbands and everything would reject them back and that their societal harmony would go back in place, even though they surrendered to Krishna in one instance, they returned back. But the gopis, they were even more surrendered than the Brahmins' wives. So we'll learn about that. But this pastime exemplifies many things. Complete surrender, being willing to give up dharma, what would normally be considered right by society or would normally be considered right by family, friend, institutional considerations, academic considerations. But ultimately, always keeping what is most pleasing to Krishna. And if you have to break a few rules to please Krishna, this is very good. So anyway, be willing to give it all up, like the Brahmins' wives, even when their husbands and all their superiors were telling them. So anyway, and then last also with the Brahmins, if you make a mistake, you should try, so let's say you offend a sadhu, or you offend a superior spiritual personality, or you offend Krishna, like the Brahmins did. Don't be. They were afraid of Kamsa and the punishment of Kamsa by, and the loss of their position if they were to go and try and supplicate themselves to Krishna. But that's an example of what we should not do. We should never fear, I might lose this benefit of life or lose that benefit of life, or I won't have this arrangement, this comfort, material comfort, or that material comfort. And like position, power, wealth, so many things if I approach Krishna. So let me remain in fear and let me stay away from Krishna. So this is a warning for this pastime as well. I think we'll end here and we'll open it up for discussion for you guys. What do you guys think of this pastime? What do you think of the lessons herein? Some discussion points. Hi. Loudly though.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, when Brahmanas are performing the sacrifice, and so do they know that Krishna, I mean, or other way around, the Brahmana's wife, they went to Krishna thinking that he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or just as a cowherd boy, or like what's
The Brahmins' wives knew he was the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Brahmins did not. And they realized after their wives all left, and they realized after the circumstance, after experiencing what happened in their sacrifice appearing to get ruined. But actually, their sacrifice got saved when the wives all came back. But yeah, it was like kind of feeling chastised by Brahman from them. But they didn't realize no. Or if they had full realization, they never could have said no, right? But they're completely covered over by their mundane considerations. So like that. But the wives weren't. The wives were much simpler. They didn't have all these, oh, I'm a Brahmana and I know how to do this and I know how to do that and I know how to do this. They were just very simple women who served their husbands dutifully. But also they had heard about Krishna and they had heard about these wonderful pastimes and they were very attracted to Krishna. And so another, you could say, lesson is simplicity is far greater than any type of, you could say, complexity in worship. The basic thing they did so much Shravan, the first process of bhakti. Well, the Brahmanas were trying to maybe do all kinds of archana and this and that and that, but they were missing the fundamental thing, just hearing about Krishna, hearing about the personality of Godhead. Or maybe even worse, they not even knowing of a personality of Godhead, maybe having impersonal realization or something like this. Or being even worse, or debatably not worse, but just as mundane, being so engulfed in the fruitive activity of doing the sacrifice, the yajna, just like this, just how the ritual says in the Vedas, and not actually seeing the essence, understanding the essence. But it's all in Leela, so that we can benefit from it. Does that answer? Okay. Any other questions? Rishi?
So, as you said that Brahman Patnis, they returned back.
A little loud if you can.
As you said that the Brahman Patnis returned back to their families because Krishna told them to do so. But I had this question that, like, listening to Krishna is it wrong in that sense?
It depends. So he was saying that the Brahmana Patnis, so the wives of the Brahmanas, they listened to Krishna to return back to their husbands. And Rishi was saying, well, is this wrong? And the simple answer would be no. How could it be wrong to listen to Krishna? But a more subtle answer would be like, it depends why you wouldn't listen to Krishna. The gopis didn't listen to Krishna, but they had such an exalted reason for not listening to Krishna. That Krishna was completely conquered and he said, I'm in so much debt to you, I could never repay you. Because they knew ultimately that they wanted to serve Krishna and surrender everything, including and have no consideration of any family ties or anything like that, children, whatever. So it's not wrong, right? There's so many different grades of devotees. So if is it wrong if if you're chanting 16 rounds but Parth is chanting 64 rounds? When maybe no, it's good that you're chanting 16 rounds. It's good that the wives of the Brahmins are doing a certain level of service to Krishna, right? But the Parth is chanting 64 rounds, sincerely, let's say, and and the gopis are surrendering that much more. It's like that. It's that much more exalted, like that. But it's not bad to listen to Krishna. Like, is it bad to follow Krishna's instructions in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita? No. Is it maybe better to follow his instructions in the 18th chapter? To even give up all the things he told you in the second chapter to ultimately surrender unto him into bhakti? That's even better. So it's the difference between good and best, or better and best. Does that make sense? Any other questions, discussion points? Shivani?
So, like, I think you said that, like, in the first part of the Bhagavad Gita, he was talking about, like, all the dharmas, like, that everyone should do. But then later he says, okay, surrender everything, not even the dharma. So, then, what are we supposed to do then? Like, we have all these shastras and everything that we should follow, but then also at the end we're not following them to get the best, like, between good and best. Like, I'm a bit, like, I just want more clarity
It's
on that.
clarity, yes. So basically,
That's why the shastras are there.
yeah, the Shastras set the parameter for how you can build a life in which you ultimately approach the Supreme Lord. You ultimately approach spirit, even Brahman. Just impersonal spirit is a certain level of understanding. And then in that realization, maybe you can understand Paramatma, that there's a conscious soul underlying all living entities and harmoniously connecting everything and everyone. But then ultimately the highest realization is that there is a Bhagavan, that there is a Supreme Personality, and that we each have a relationship with this personality. So ultimately, all of the previous Shastras are giving you instructions how to make more and more spiritual advancement. But when you make the most spiritual advancement, one of the things that you have to be willing to give up, potentially to make the most spiritual advancement, is all of the lower teachings, or all of the foundational teachings, like a kind of an example would be, PEMDAS in math. So PEMDAS, parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. It's the order of operations. Yes. Yes. So this is like this. So let's just say addition and subtraction, they have their place, but when in the presence of a higher rule, you have to follow the higher rule. So similarly, in the presence of Krishna, you have karma yoga and jnana yoga, and they have their place, but in the presence of the higher rule, let's say the parentheses, which is like the overarching, the highest thing in PEMDAS, then it actually renders that seemingly insignificant in comparison to following that higher rule. So there may be times where you're doing a sacrifice, and it says in the Shastras to do the sacrifice like this, but the whole purpose you're doing the sacrifice, like say Krishna himself, approaches you and has a request of you, and you just ignore him. You're like, no, I'm doing my addition and subtraction. But the parentheses is demanding, like, no, this is the essence of why we're doing the whole thing. So you might make a miscalculation if you only apply the lower rule and consider that to be the highest rule. So this is kind of what Bhaktivinoda Thakur mentions as being like the ass-like brahmana, or the mundane devotee. We can get very fixed on mundane things in our Krishna consciousness that actually have nothing to do with the ultimate essence, which is love for Krishna, attachment to Krishna. That's why we do all this. So it's not that the other rules are bad, but there's higher orders of operations. Like doing your dharma. Go ahead, Meghna.
No, you can complete it.
No, it's okay.
Do you think it's important to master all the lower teachings before, like, maybe artificially, like, giving to the higher teachings which you don't really understand because you haven't really understood the lower teachings? Because, like, even in the Bodmas example, like, you might have to do the parentheses first, but if you don't know the addition subtraction, you won't really get to the solution if you don't do that part at the end, right? Like, you do the parentheses first, but you do get to an end where there is
Yes.
additions of
So the PEMDAS example is a very crude example. It's not like it's like an
Yeah.
exact, but so look at in this circumstance the wives of the Brahmanas. They didn't know all the Vedic sacrifices. They didn't know all. They're just simple village girls who don't know anything. They don't have Brahmin threads. They don't know all of these advanced mastery things in the lower teachings of the Vedas, so to say. But what did they have? They had the highest thing. So in relation to love for Krishna, actually none of that is necessary at all. So it would be like the PEMDAS example wouldn't completely be accurate in that example, but it's not of actually any importance. We see people, even a lot of our acharyas, who is a brahmana by birth up on the altar. No,
No.
not. I don't know if any of them are. Maybe Jagannath Das Babaji or Gorkashore Das Babaji, but I know the other three are not brahmanas by birth. So they didn't have to master all of these other teachings to ultimately, even from a worldly standpoint, these are some of the most renowned personalities throughout all of India, and they didn't even have to be of that so-called higher caste, but they had the highest essence, which was bhakti, devotion unto Krishna. Haridas Thakur, there's an example. Advaita Acharya was the leader of the Brahmanas in Navadvip, and he did the Shraddha ceremony for his past relatives. And so what you do at the Shraddha ceremony is you would give the first offering of prasadam unto the greatest personality in the assembly. So Advaita Acharya, he actually chose Haridas Thakur as the greatest personality. Why? Because Haridas Thakur, he chanted the holy name literally 192 rounds a day. He was completely surrendered unto the holy name. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu named him the Nam Acharya, the Acharya of chanting the names of the Lord. So he was the greatest personality, other than Advaita Acharya, in the group. But he was born of Muslim birth. He was born what would be considered mlecha, not even of a Shudra class. But no mastery, it said maybe Advaita Acharya initiated him. Some scholars, there's argument there. The Prem Vilas says this, that Advaita Acharya initiated Haridas Thakur into Brahminical initiation. But that's never seen anywhere else. I know of a lot of Gaudiya Vaishnava scholars, they argue this point. What is authoritative in this regard? But it doesn't so much matter that he was born of the lowest caste, and yet because he had the highest essence and he was performing the Yuga Dharma, which was the chanting of the holy name, and he had mastered Sankirtan, which is the highest teaching. No, he didn't have to master any of the other types of teachings. And Advaita Acharya, he recognized this, and all the brahmanas there were shocked that Advaita Acharya had chosen Haridas Thakur, but he led by example of what the highest thing ultimately was. And it isn't following all of the so-called lower teachings or fundamental teachings. It was mastering the highest essence. I mean, Krishna says it, Sarva Dharman Parityajya, abandon. He doesn't say master all the Dharma and then surrender unto me. He says abandon it. Abandon all Dharma and just surrender unto me. And he'll deliver you from all the sinful reactions, which is why we do our Dharma in the first place, because we don't want to get bad results out of life. But Krishna will take care of that whole thing anyway, don't worry. Like, for instance, my parents did not want me to be a monk. They did not want me to start studying all these things. They told me, you'll never find a wife like this, you'll never have a career like this, you'll never get a house, you'll never be like any normal person, you'll never have children, you'll never have all these things. But somehow or other, one by one, Krishna is arranging all those things. And I abandoned their position as superiors in my life, which seemed That's adharmic. That's not proper dharma. But for Krishna, just like the wives of the Brahmanas, that was the highest dharma. It's to surrender unto the Supreme Lord. It would never, for a wife to disobey her husband, to disobey her father, to disobey her brothers. This is horrible behavior, adharmic behavior. But to please Krishna, and they're standing averse to Krishna, this is the best behavior. So my parents telling me to, not jump further into Krishna consciousness, it's adharmic to disobey my parents, but on the other hand, they're acting averse to Krishna in this moment, so I must disobey them. So like this is we have to be willing, and if anything stands in the way to service to Krishna, we have to be willing, lest we be like the unfortunate Brahmanas who miss out on Krishna. And that's the great fear, the greatest fear. So, any other questions? We have maybe a little bit more time here. I heard the beginning of something.
Do you think it's important to be like true to where you're at? Because in all the examples, everyone is true to where they are at. Like the Brahmanas don't really have those feelings for Krishna yet, so they're not leaving their things and going. Whereas the Brahmanas' wives, they're going, but then they're coming back, even because Krishna is telling them to come back, because they're at that point in devotion, and the gopis are not coming back, even though Krishna is telling them, because they're at that stage of devotion.
Sure.
So it would be like really
Artificial
if the Brahmanas just went and surrendered onto Krishna and showed fake love, and they're not even feeling it or ready for it. But I don't know. So
No, yeah, you're right. So Krishna actually he deals with this subject matter in Bhagavad Gita in the 12th chapter, and he says this. He says, just fix your mind upon me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and engage all your intelligence in me. Thus you will live in me always without a doubt. So this is the highest thing. Just fix your mind upon me and engage all your intelligence unto me. But then he says, my dear Arjuna, winner of wealth, if you cannot fix your mind upon me without deviation, then follow the regulated principles of Bhakti Yoga in this way. You will develop a desire to attain me. So if you can't be fully devoted to him, then follow some regulative principles of Bhakti Yoga. Then he says, if you cannot practice the regulations of Bhakti Yoga, then just try to work for me, because by working for me, you will come to the perfect stage. So he's saying, if you can't do this, then do this, and you'll be able to work your way up. And he says, if however you're unable to work in this consciousness, then try to act giving up all results of your work and try to be self-situated. If you cannot take to this practice, then engage yourself in the cultivation of knowledge. Better than knowledge, however, is meditation, and better than meditation is renunciation of the fruits of action. For by such renunciation one can attain peace of mind. And then it goes on. Who is very dear to him, but it's a progression. It's not that you'll just achieve mastery. It's not saying all right, every one of you gopis. Even the Brahmin, like what Rishi asked, is it bad that they turned around? No, it isn't bad. It's good. They made advancement. They did an advanced thing. But there's a more advanced thing that's exemplified. So allegorically, when we go through these pastimes and then enter these pastimes into our lives, because we're going through the pastimes with Krishna too, there will be times, and maybe we'll act similarly to how the wives of the Brahmanas. Maybe we'll act similarly to how the Brahmanas acted. Maybe we'll act, like in the demonic pastimes, like the demons. But so on, as we make our progression, we become pure and pure and pure, unless it's less artificial and it's more genuine and more authentic. And then eventually you can make that jump. But yeah, it's not recommended to artificially jump. But it is recommended to be as sincere as you possibly can be. And only you can answer that. Only it's between you and Krishna. Am I being as sincere as I possibly can be with where I'm at? So that's the main thing. And Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Ye yatamam prapadyante tam stataiva bhajamyaham. As all surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. So, yeah, you want to surrender 1% to Krishna? No problem. You can get 1% of the glories of, a little bit of surrender unto Krishna. If you want to surrender more and more and more, then that reciprocation is there. And if you were like the gopis and you surrender completely everything to Krishna, he says, I can't even repay you. And he's just, you've completely purchased him with that type of surrender. So that's the ultimate type of thing. But we'll learn about them. We're not there yet. We're working our way. Krishna's pastimes are lined up. Bhagavatam is lined up so you make that gradual progression. So go through the Bhagavatam and this gradual progression is there. It won't be artificial. It's not like, we're not like saying you to take it cheaply. Like, all right, Meghna, go be a gopi, give up everything, just go to Vrindavan and, abandon. I can't do that actually at this point in my life. But what we are saying is like, all right, maybe you're here in Syracuse, so maybe give it as much time as you practically possibly can to making spiritual advancement and while still completing all of your responsibilities. And apply and integrate these things, and you'll see how you can make more and more advancement going forward. That would be a more realistic thing, rather than just say, just leave it all behind. You leave us behind, leave the parents behind, leave school, just go to Vrindavan, get lost in Krishna consciousness there, or something like that. That's not usually the appropriate progression. It is a progression. Krishna's pastimes are a progression. He doesn't just start out. The Bhagavatam doesn't start out with the gopis' pastimes and then it's done. Oh, this is the highest thing. No, it's a slow progression, and many truths have to be understood before you could have that realization to do many of these things. So anyway, anything last thing from you guys? Oh, you in the back.
We were talking about the Brahmanas' wives and the Brahmanas and kind of how, is it Bhakti Vinod Thakur that's giving Krishna Samhita?
Yes.
He's calling, them das like Brahmanas, meaning like donkey-like Brahmanas, going through the motions kind of, and then glorifying the Brahmanas' wives because their hearts are kind of with Krishna, and because of the simplicity they're able to easily give up kind of the rules and regulations and things like that, but it seems like it's like difficult, at least in my experience, when there's a lot of rules and regulations. Some people do really well with that. Like you do really well with that. You like them. I like them to some degree. But then other people follow them because they know they're good, but not necessarily, it's not so like natural, or at least at first. But then where's the balance between here's the rules and regulations and here's like the spontaneity of like my love and devotion to Krishna?
Well, there's a couple things. I'm actually reading about this subject matter in a couple of my books right now. In one sense, right, we can think, well, this raga path is the highest path, spontaneous devotion. And all the Vaidhi Bhakti can just kind of be given up, But actually, it's said that the Raga Bhakta, so as to not disturb others in their raga, they'll follow all the rules and the regulations for the most part. And unless there's a time where it's really getting in the way of their raga. Now, if we want to abandon the rules and regulations of bhakti just because we don't feel like doing it, then this is nonsense. But if we want to abandon the rule, like for instance, not doing adharmic things. Krishna says abandon dharma, so I'll just do adharmic things. this is nonsense. This is just a disturbance. Actually, this is heavily criticized by our acharyas in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, to not follow the rules and regulations. But if there comes a I actually heard an instance of, I think it was Narayan Maharaj. He is very strict with how he performs Chaturmasya and Kartik Vrats. He won't take loki, tomato, eggplant, so many foodstuffs during this time. And he's very strict about following the rules and regulations. But one time he was visiting Govindadev in Rajasthan, in Jaipur. And they honored him at the temple, and they were so appreciative and grateful that he joined the assembly there. So they gave him prasadam, which contained loki and eggplant and things that he normally avoids. So as not to disturb the offering given by the devotees, and he felt by Govindaji himself, he honored that prasadam, but he then went back to following his rules and regulations that he knew were important. But in that instance, he felt it was a higher rule to accept the loving offering of Govindadev. So he was willing to break the rule. Another example of him I was thinking about, he took a vow to stay in Vrindavan his whole life. And there's so many shastras of our acharyas where that's the recommendation. But his dear friend Srila Prabhupada, his dying wish to him was to please help my disciples. And so when his disciples that he was helping were requesting his help in the different continents across the world, he broke his vrat that he had made. Why? Because he felt the vrat of a dear friend and Vaishnava requesting him was a higher rule and more pleasing to Krishna than his own personal vrat. So like this, that's when we should break the rules, when there's a higher rule to follow. But just breaking the rules because you don't feel like doing them is actually, that's very heavily rebuked in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So we should try and follow rules. This is good. But the Brahmins' wives were serving their husbands in the sacrifice. They were following all the rules with their husbands. But as soon as Krishna had requested and their husbands became averse, where following those rules became averse to serving Krishna, they abandoned it. And then they did it. So so same with that story of accepting the prasadam. Now a loving offering is being made by the Govindadev deity. I actually just the other day, I ate that sweet, that Guru Maharaj. I kind of made a vrat for this Chaturmasya. I would not take grains, So I haven't been taking grains. But then my Guru Maharaj has sent with Parth some nice sweet from Srinathaji in where was it, Parth? Udaipur. Yeah, so some nice prasadam from Udaipur, from Srinathaji. And I saw it as this is prasadam from one, my Guru Maharaj, and then two from Srinathaji in Udaipur. Shall I reject it because I made some vrat? So I chose not to, because I felt like there was a higher rule than my own personal vrat. I didn't want to take grains for this Chaturmasya. So that's what I can understand about that. Go ahead.
So your point of the Brahmana's wives are serving the Brahmanas the whole time, helping them, because it's different, right? People's natures are different, and not to generalize, but typically, now it's a bit different from Brahmana initiation and things, and women are on the altar, but traditionally you didn't see women really on the altar performing all these different kinds of things, themselves. They were more in supportive roles. So is that by nature? Is that just what's normal? For me, I'm asking because, yes, I'm Brahmanically initiated and all these things, but actually, I'd rather just dress the deities and buy them cute clothes and make them cute things than sit there and every morning, arrange the arti plate and then these kinds of things, and chant all my mantras.
That doesn't mean that you definitely neglect that. It depends on the situation. You know, you have certain duties. I mean, the brahmanas, a woman's duty in Vedic times, and this may seem offensive, but it's not. It's just reality. Was always to serve their husbands. That was the highest duty of a woman. You know, I call you Devi and you call me Hari. That this is a traditional thing, where because the woman was to see her husband as Hari, as the supreme Lord, and similarly the husband would see the woman as like a goddess. So yeah. So on one level, doing your duty, you should do your duty, and you know, and maybe it depends on what your nature is. The reason Prabhupada made so many improvisations as to what was traditionally done is because he saw in the West that this wasn't the nature of the people here. You can't just implant Vedic Varnashram Dharma into the West and just expect everyone to mold into it. So he realized that the women, it said that they were more like men than the men here. You know, the women were more, in many ways, they had more like what would be natural tendencies that the men of ancient Vedic times would have, than even the men had here. So you had a little bit. So Prabhupada said, all right, you can do all the things that the men can do, because actually you might do them better here. Because this is the nature of, at least of the Western women, you know, they're not following these traditional roles, even.
Sorry.
Hello.
Just
Yes, go ahead, no problem, no problem. We all just coexist.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So this kind of, so it depends on your nature, how you want to serve Krishna. Or even, maybe more advanced, is how is Krishna in your life calling you to serve? You know, we can always choose our service. I want to serve like this, I want to serve like this. But then everyone around you is saying like, well, we need this needs to be done, this needs to be done. You know, and there may be times where you have to make harder decisions. You may have some personal vrets with what you'd like to get done, and then you have to, you know, sometimes that happens when we have a program here and I have to do an offering. I know how an offering should be done, and it would be ideal that an offering is done a certain way. But when we have everyone sitting here trying to do kirtan, and where I might have to make compromises in how I do the offering because of my other demands of service. So you have to kind of see what is the need. What is Krishna? Is Krishna sending his friends over to tell you, hey, I want this, I want that, and you're like, the brahmanas like, no, it's got to be just like this. Like I can get like that, right? It's got to be just like this. But there may be a genuine call from Krishna in many different ways that maybe he's looking for something else. So we all have to evaluate what that is. You know, we can get very fixed up in the rules and regulations and lose the essence. What is Krishna? What is really pleasing to Krishna in this circumstance? So, does that answer? I think we're about out of time for questions. Is there anything like really important? Well, let's do a little bhajan. Can someone maybe get up you're all in the WhatsApp group? Can someone get up Jaya Radhe Jaya Krishna in the WhatsApp group? It's a nice bhajan by Krishnadas Goswami. I've actually historically messed up this bhajan before. Me and my wife practiced it the other night for like 20 minutes, so I'm hoping that's enough. Yeah, I just posted in that SU group. Is everyone satisfied? Is anyone mad at me? Did I say anything harsh or too much? No? Okay.
I think this was a very insightful discussion actually, and it made me think a bit more about like my own practices, I guess, and my relationship with the Lord.
Yeah.
Because I know like I tend to get carried away too, like with the rules and everything. Like, okay, so like I set this fast for myself, and then
Hmm.
I know one time, like, my grandma, she brought some prasad, and then, like, she, like, fed it to me, and I felt like, oh my god, like, my fast is broken, and I felt really sad.
Hmm.
But then I'm like, I guess maybe that's what God was willing.
Yeah.
So then
Maybe.
I guess not being as rigid. I don't know, it just made me think about that more, I guess. I
Yeah.
wasn't thinking about previously, but this past time made more sense because I guess it's like if I was following strictly the fast, I would be more like the Brahmin men
Hmm.
who were just doing the sacrifices, even ignoring Krishna Bhagwanji.
Hmm.
But then if I guess I'm not as rigid, I would be more tending towards like the Brahmin wives, because it's all like prioritization and in that sense, like
Yeah.
what's bringing you closer to the Lord.
Yeah, what's bringing you in a deeper attachment to the Lord? And sometimes that may be breaking your self-imposed rules or even Vedic rules. There's many times where Krishna asked the Pandavas and his devotees to break the rules, but that was ultimately pleasing to him. So it's, the essence is, Krishna, Bhagavad Gita is all about learning the rules and then learning how to break them, So that's the ultimate. These are really good realizations, Shivani. I'm very happy. I actually also, my Guru Maharaj, when we were getting married in India, he was taking us to all kinds of different relatives to take prasadam before we got married, and he was very happy to do that. But one time it was Ekadashi, and I didn't want to eat on Ekadashi because that's my personal vrat that I make. But I actually had to eat. Still no grains and beans. I followed a certain level there. The Shastric definitely do not do this. But yeah, there are times where I felt like Krishna is calling me to do something else and to get out of my comfort zone with all my rules and regulations. So it's very, very good that you learned this, and that's the nature of Krishna's pastimes. They're very didactic, so you learn many things. That's one of the many amazing benefits of them. And then ultimately, it'll help us develop deeper attachment to the Lord. That's the essence. That's the essence. So if you felt like honoring the prasadam your grandmother has given you as to the highest thing for deepening your attachment to the Lord, then you made the right decision. So very good. We're running out of time, so we're going to begin this. Everyone has Jaya Radhe, Jaya Krishna up on their phone to read the bhajan. Maybe if anyone wants to share with a neighbor, things like that, you're welcome to. Can I have this somewhere other than here? I should end on Zoom. Thank you for joining us.